On behalf of the Disability Inclusion and Access team at the Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy, it's my distinct pleasure to extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you here today. Thank you for joining us for the launch and the panel discussion on disabled-friendly consumer protection. In the backdrop of the World Consumer Rights Day celebrated on 15th March, we wanted to bring to light one of the neglected issues in consumer rights discourse, the rights of consumers with disabilities. Our report is a significant milestone in our ongoing journey towards a more inclusive, accessible, and barrier-free world for persons with disabilities. We have delved deep into the intricate landscape of consumer protection, focusing on the rights and challenges faced by persons with disabilities as consumers in India. In a rapidly evolving economic and technological landscape, it is paramount that we ensure no one is left behind. Yet, for far too long, persons with disabilities have been disproportionately affected by inaccessible goods, services, and consumer protection. Our report sheds light on the systemic barriers that hinder their full participation in the consumer market and advocates for meaningful change. As we gather here today, we acknowledge that the approximately 2.2 crore persons with disabilities in India, who constitute a significant consumer base, have diverse needs and requirements which must be recognized and respected. We will start things off with a short address from Damini Ghosh, the team lead of the Disability Inclusion and Access team. This will be followed by a presentation by Amar Jain, giving a broad overview of the report, including an in-depth exploration of the key findings, insights, and recommendations derived from the research. With this background, we will move into the panel discussion on understanding the factors contributing to accessibility gaps in consumer protection, evaluating the efficacy of existing consumer and disability laws, and the way forward to improve consumer protection for persons with disabilities. This will be followed by a quick round of question and answers and closing remarks. We hope that this can be an enriching and collaborative experience for all present here. Without any further delay, I would like to invite Damini to give her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sagarika. A very good evening to everyone. At the very outset, I would like to thank all of you here for taking out the time and coming today. I am Damini Ghosh, a Senior Resident Fellow at the Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy, where I lead the organization's work on disability inclusion and access. In terms of background, Vidhi was established in 2013 as an independent, not-for-profit think tank to undertake legal research towards making better laws and to improve governance for the public good. Upholding values of non-partisan engagement, research excellence, and independence, Vidhi undertakes original legal research on various areas to identify shortcomings in the law and initiate discourse among citizenry. It also engages extensively with the Government of India, state governments, and several authorities to inform policy making and provide legal research and drafting assistance at various stages of lawmaking. Some of our practice areas include legal design and regulation, law and technology, corporate and financial regulation, judicial reforms, urban governance, health, and climate and ecosystems. Now, in the area of disability rights, Vidhi has been at the forefront of conducting legal research and advocacy towards the fulfillment of the rights of persons with disabilities as mandated under Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. Given the horizontal nature of this practice area, our work at present focuses on access to urban spaces and inclusive education. Specifically, understanding how cities can be made accessible by design to persons with disabilities culminated into our report, Beyond Reasonable Accommodation, in 2022, where using the city of Bangalore as a case study, we provided legal and policy solutions towards making urban spaces inclusive. The idea being that these recommendations may then be replicable in other cities in India as well. This also led to the release of a 4-part working paper series last year titled Inclusive Urbanism, where we focused on how persons with not so visible or invisible disabilities in particular navigate urban spaces. Understanding that cities offer various services, amenities, and facilities which continue to remain inaccessible to persons with disabilities, this issue being further heightened during the COVID-19 pandemic, Vidhi in 2022 collaborated with Mission Accessibility and iSTEM to conduct an evidence-based evaluation of the accessibility of 10 of the most widely used apps in India from the standpoint of persons with disability. This culminated into a report titled Making the Digital Ecosystem Disabled Friendly, which was released last year and contains practical recommendations for what each stakeholder could do to ensure that persons with disabilities are able to participate in the digital marketplace. In fact, in the same way, during this evaluation itself in June 2022, there was a consultation which brought together experts and stakeholders to discuss how the right to digital accessibility may be realized for persons with disabilities. And it was during this discussion that issues which persons with disabilities face as consumers Protection Act of 2019. Despite being recent and considered progressive, consumers with disabilities continue to face challenges when it comes to accessing, using, enjoying consumer goods and services, as well as in accessing consumer complaint and grievance redressal mechanisms. My colleagues Rahul and Soumya in their work have tried to look at what a truly disabled friendly and inclusive consumer protection legal framework could look like. On that note, I would now request Amar Jain, the research fellow at Vidhi, to present the outline, key findings and recommendations of this report. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you Damini for the introduction. I am Soumya Jain. I work as a research fellow with the Disability Inclusion team at Vidhi. I have co-authored this report with my colleagues Rahul Bajaj and Hussain Anis Khan. In this presentation, I will take you through the key findings and the recommendations that we have outlined in the report. So, from the earlier civilizations to modern societies, one second. Yeah, I'll begin again. From the earlier civilizations to modern societies, humans have engaged in exchange of goods and services as a fundamental part of their daily lives. Today, this exchange is not just about a transaction, but it's a cornerstone of how we function and live in a society. However, it's important to acknowledge that not every individual, despite being equal member of the society, has an equal opportunity to participate as a consumer. This report focuses on one such group, though these are consumers with disabilities. For any consumer out there, there are always risks of being exploited at the hands of sellers and service providers and manufacturers. But for consumers with disabilities, these risks don't stop here. They also encounter rampant inaccessibility, discrimination, and exclusion. It is unfortunate that this pertinent issue has not received enough attention specifically in India. And recognizing this gap, we at Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy have dedicated our past few months in exploring this issue in depth and conducting research, which has culminated into this report called Disabled Friendly Consumer Protection. In the next 15 minutes, I will briefly lay out the outline of the report. I will discuss the challenges faced by persons with disability. Then we'll discuss the gaps there are in laws and policies which fail to address these challenges. And in the end, I'll conclude with the recommendations with the hope that they will serve as a blueprint for an effective consumer protection framework in the country. This presentation also includes clip arts and images, and I will be describing those in the course of the presentation. For persons with disabilities in their roles as consumers, there are two fundamental requirements that set them apart from other consumers. First is being able to access goods and services, and then the second is being able to access support in case of any confusion or a grievance. For any other consumer, these requirements might be a given. But for consumers with disabilities, as our research indicates, these two major requirements have been a constant struggle for them. So, starting with the first key challenge, that is accessibility of goods and services. If a person makes a purchase, then the most fundamental requirement for the good or the product is to be usable by the person. If the person cannot use the product, then such transaction is meaningless. So we have explored how consumer goods and services can be inaccessible for persons with disabilities, and it can take various forms. For example, physical inaccessibility, which means some certain products are designed in a manner in which they cannot be possibly accessible for persons with disabilities. For example, a shirt with buttons can cause distress for a person with motor difficulties, or a certain fabric can trigger sensory overload. A two-wheeler can be inaccessible for a person with locomotor disability. So these are just the list of inaccessible goods goes on. Then there are certain products that may seem accessible, but at the end will be rendered inaccessible if they lack supporting information. For example, if a person with visual impairment buys a milk product and milk packet, and on the milk packet the expiry date is physically printed on the packet, and then the person has no way apart from asking the shopkeeper or taking external help to ascertain the expiry date on the product. Just like accessible goods, services have been observed to be equally, if not more, inaccessible. In contrast to goods, it's easier to make services accessible thanks to the internet, but there are found to be a lot of inaccessibility issues with them. For example, we have in this presentation, we have in this particular slide, we have collated certain cases of that were filed, complaints that were filed before the Chief Commissioner of Persons with Disabilities regarding inaccessible services. For example, the website of Make My Trip and the iOS application of Practo were found to be inaccessible. Then in one case, Punjab National Bank denied providing ATM card to a person with disability. In another case, some insurance company denied health insurance to a lady with intellectual disability. These are the various forms in which goods and services can be inaccessible for persons with disabilities. So the second challenge emerges when a person, even if they're able to access a good or service, but if there's a defect or deficiency with the good or service and they cannot seek support or report an issue, then their consumer interest can never be fully ensured. There are typically there are two recourses that one can take while raising a complaint for a product or service. They can either directly contact the company through their customer support services. For example, if I buy a product and there's a defect, if there's a customer care number available on the product, I can directly call the company. But here, problems such as limited modes of reporting come. If the company is only offering grievance redressal through, for example, telephone conversation, then it can be a problem for a person with speech impairment. Similarly, persons with disabilities have also raised issues of untrained professionals. For example, there's a customer care executive and the person is not sensitized to the needs of persons with disabilities, then the person might not be able to help the person with disability. Another recourse is a person can directly lodge a complaint with the Consumer Dispute Resolution Commissions, popularly known as consumer commissions. Here, a person can physically approach a consumer commission and lodge a complaint, but unfortunately, like a lot of other courts in India, consumer commissions, according to our research, have also been observed to be inaccessible. For example, they may not have enough space for a wheelchair to navigate, or they don't have audio announcement facility, or there's no tactile pavements. So these things can pose challenges for persons with disabilities. Then the other option, if the person cannot go in physically, then there's another option is through online registration of complaints. Recently, the Department of Consumer Affairs have launched 2 separate portals, the e-Dakhil portal and e-Jagriti portal, for registering complaints online. However, both these websites lack basic accessibility features. For example, there is an accessibility menu that is generally found on government websites. This accessibility menu is missing from these websites. And for example, if a person wants to lodge a complaint on e-Dakhil platform, then the person needs to log in first. But the login requirement also has a captcha requirement, which is only readable and there's no audio accompanying the captcha. So which effectively renders it impossible for a person with visual impairment to file a complaint through these portals. So these were the 2 fundamental requirements that a consumer with disability need for them to participate as a consumer. But there are several, we have identified there are several root causes which are why these challenges exist. These root causes can be attributed and can to different at different levels, and businesses and government and the law, all these different stakeholders can come up and address these challenges. For example, the root cause with respect to businesses is businesses do not see consumers with disabilities as their target audience. So they design products and services for mainstream customers, and they do not consider accessibility features in mind. Here it is important for us to amplify and for the businesses to realize that persons with disabilities constitute around 5 to 7% of India's population according to the World Bank estimates, which means they constitute a significant consumer base. Even just the market for assistive devices in India is valued around 4,500 crore rupees, which underscores the economic potential of this market, of this consumer base. So even if they want to broaden their consumer base, they want to introduce more customers, they should consider incorporating accessibility through universal design and reasonable accommodation principles. Universal design refers to making goods and making something accessible, making something usable for all to the widest extent possible. And reasonable accommodation refers to making changes and modifications which can make something accessible. So businesses following both of these models, both of these principles, the goods and services can be accessible. A simple example would be the presentation has a picture of Otrivin, the nasal spray, and its QR code, which leads to a PDF which basically, for example, there are provisions for universally designed goods, reasonable accommodation and services, accessible courts and accessible court procedures. These accessibility rights are not there in the Consumer Protection Act. However, when it comes to enforcement of the legislation, enforcement of these rights, RPWD has provision for Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities or State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, to whom a person with disability can approach the commissioners when there's a violation of the RPWD Act. However, their orders are only recommendatory in nature and they're not binding. On the other hand, under CPA and the Consumer Protection Act provides for consumer commissions. So, if there's a violation under the Consumer Protection Act, a consumer can approach the consumer commissions, and the orders passed by these consumer commissions are binding in nature, and they can even attract a penalty, a fine, or even imprisonment. The RPWD Act provides for penalties, but these penalties are rarely imposed. And however, under the Consumer Protection Act, the penalties range from 1 lakh rupees and they even go up to 50 lakh rupees. The most important thing, provision, that is compensation. Under RPWD Act, there is no specific provision for compensation in violation of the Act. However, under Consumer Protection Act, consumers have there are provisions for compensation, and consumers have even received a record compensation of 7.2 crore rupees under the Consumer Protection Act. So, while both these legislations seem to be inadequate, the RPWD Act has the list of rights that a person with disability needs, but it lacks when it comes to the effective remedies and implementation of the Act. For this reason, our recommendation for the law is that Consumer Protection Act is more suitable for incorporating the rights of consumers with disabilities. It has a sectoral focus. It's the primary legislation for consumer rights, and it has been very effective in providing remedies to even consumers with disabilities. For example, in a case where a person with disability was not able to watch a movie in a theater because of lack of ramps and other accessible facilities, the District Consumer Commission even awarded a sum of 5 lakh rupees to the consumer, which goes on showing that Consumer Protection Act can basically provide remedy to a consumer with disability. So, for this reason, it is unfortunate that Consumer Protection Act, which was enacted in 2019, 3 years after the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016, that they have not incorporated the rights of persons with disabilities. So, it's our recommendation that these legislation needs to be harmonized. And in our report, we have provided list of proposed recommendations to make the consumer protection framework disable friendly. Some examples of these amendments are we can make the law can provide for accessibility and right to accessibility and reasonable accommodation as consumer rights, or for example, making failure to provide reasonable accommodation as a deficiency in service. If failure to provide reasonable accommodation is a deficiency in service, the consumer with disability can approach a consumer commission and even get redressal and compensation in such case. So with this, I would like to end my presentation here. We have invited esteemed list of panelists here. From here, Rahul will take ahead and we will discuss the viability of these recommendations and how we can take these recommendations forward. We have with us Dr. Kiran Gupta. She's a professor of law at Faculty of Law at Delhi University. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. We have Amar Jain, who's a lawyer, and he was also a co-founder of Mission Accessibility. We have Rahul Bajaj with us. He's Senior Associate Fellow at Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy, and he'll be moderating the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Also, turn down the air conditioning a little. Thanks, Soumya, for. Can I be heard? Yes, now it's working. Thanks, Soumya, for that comprehensive overview of the report. It's an honor to be getting an opportunity to share the findings of the report with all of you and hopefully identifying pathways to bring the recommendations contained in the report to life. What I think it would be helpful for us to do in this discussion is two things. One, sort of to discuss how we practically operationalize the findings in the report in terms of either, spotting opportunities for litigation before consumer forums where persons with disabilities can exercise their rights, conducting more research on the challenges faced by them in collaboration with government authorities, etc. And the second would be to see sort of how the RPWD Act and the Consumer Protection Act, like what their interplay is. And the argument in the report is that the RPWD Act is insufficient to deal with the needs of consumers with disabilities. So I'd like to see what the panelists and the audience think about that, and whether that is a premise that they agree with, and if so, then sort of how do we ensure that both sets of forums can practically coexist. So we were also to have the Deputy Chief Commissioner, Mr. Praveen Ambasta, Deputy Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, joining us, but he could not join us. I will then first call on Amar to speak about the recommendations contained in the report and what his thoughts are as to how those can be operationalized, or what his assessment of the recommendations is. That is one part. The second is whether he buys this argument that the RPWD Act is actually insufficient and we need to amend the CPA, and how do we convince others of that, right? Because the most common pushback you will encounter is, well, you have a full act which is specifically designed for persons with disabilities, then why should you go around amending other laws? Then tomorrow you'll say the Banking Regulation Act needs to be amended, the Insurance Acts need to be amended. So is that how disability rights are to be secured? Amar.
Thank you, Rahul, for having me here. Thank you, Vidhi team, and it's an honor to be here. I'll first answer your second question first, Rahul, and then we'll go to the first question, because then talking about the first question would make more sense. When you look at any business and when you want to comply, what would typically we look at? We would look at the broad framework that is applicable to a business, right? So when a consumer facing business would look at securing its compliance, it would typically look for the consumer framework that it needs to ensure compliance with. Whereas when you talk about persons with disabilities, a business or any service provider for that matter would only look at rights of persons with disabilities act when there is actually a specific violation when it is brought to the notice of a business or a service provider against a person with disability. That is my starting point. So unless you have Consumer Protection Act, which is the main framework which define rights of consumers overall, which includes framework to deal with problems or challenges that persons with disabilities face, you will never be able to kind of centralize the need for making consumer goods and products and services accessible, available, and in a non-discriminatory manner to persons with disabilities. Which is why it is imperative that the Consumer Protection Act be amended to include the rights of consumer with disability, so that the while it is one thing to say that ignorance of statute is no excuse, but that's only when one is brought to the notice that you are ignorant about a statute compliance and you're taken to the court for violation of a statute. But when you do your day-to-day operation, when you operate your business or a product or service, when you provide to a consumer, and if you have disability related aspects covered there, it makes it very much more stronger from enforcement perspective. That is where I would like to answer your question, why it is important to amend Consumer Protection Act, and we'll talk about whether the current disability law is sufficient to deal with it or not. I'll come to that once we talk about the recommendations. The very first recommendation, that we kind of dealt when the report I also peer reviewed this report, so I had a privilege of reading this entire report before this panel discussion. The first argument that this report makes is that there needs to be definitions of reasonable accommodation as well as universal design. Now, most services that were designed from disability perspective to begin with ended up helping everybody. And I'll give you some examples. When Google Maps conceived the idea of making audio guided navigation available initially, it was, I think, if I'm not wrong, before 2011 or 10. It was initially aimed at helping people with blindness to know where they are and where they are navigating. But today, all of us, I think, would agree that when we go onto road, the first thing that we do in our cars or wherever we are, we turn our navigation system and we use the voice guided feature to tell us where to go and what the next course of direction would be. Right? Specs. Initially, it started as for people who have low vision or people who have eyesight power difficulties. So it started to help them. But it ended up catering to a very different set of audience. It's later on also became style statement, right? So mostly the idea that accessibility is only for persons with disabilities or universal design only helps persons with disability is quite incorrect. I'll give you another example. One of the asks that we as blind people always have, that you should have audio announcement of the floor in the lift. Now you may say that it only helps people with blindness. But if you look at all of us when we are chit-chatting, when you're inside a mall or inside any place, and when we look at the lift, many times you'll realize if the lift has audio description, even if you have overlooked the display board, and you suddenly realize that, oh, the lift is going down or up because that audio announcement comes. Otherwise, you will not look at the display board. After getting inside, we realize, oh, this is going down, let's get out of it. Right? So, point I'm trying to make is that accessibility in universal design, that is why universal design is very important from consumer goods perspective or services perspective. That's first thing. Second thing, reasonable accommodation. Now, despite making a product or a service universally accessible, there could be cases where we may have to do some adaptations to make sure that a particular person in need is able to use a particular service or a product. One example could be that if you order food or a grocery from any of the online platforms, and let's say the food product or the grocery, etc., is defective, does not meet a particular quality standard, and you kind of raise a complaint that this is not good and I want this to be replaced. One of the requirements that you will encounter is that nowadays, to curb the menace of misuse of this provision, you would the platform would ask you to provide a screenshot. You would have noticed this in food delivery parcels or otherwise, right? Now, as a person with blindness, again, you're not able to take screenshots. But if your call center executives or if your bot is sensitized, even the chat bot, where if I say that I'm a person with disability and I have difficulty taking a screenshot, then there could be some exception processes where a person may, an agent can connect with you, they could see the parcel over a video call, or they could give you an exception and you would still be able to claim that refund, right? So, which is where the need of reasonable accommodation becomes important. The next thing which a consumer is entitled to is basically right to be informed about the quality, the potency, the purity, etc., right, of the goods or services that he or she is ordering. Just today afternoon, when I was getting ready for this panel discussion, I realized that my wardrobe was not well managed because I had very recently got all my clothes ironed and I did not get it matched properly. And I was finding it hard to match the colors and I was very irritated. I was like, I'm going for the consumer protection panel. The first industry that I should take up in consumer rights is garments industry, as to how as a blind person I match my colors independently. The point I'm trying to convey is that every consumer has a right to be informed. The milk product that you order online, Soumya spoke about it, that when you order a milk packet, it happened to me. I ordered from an online platform. The expiry was the same day. I had no idea because it was printed physically. I assumed that because the shelf life was written 3 to 4 days, the third day when I saw the milk packet, it was expired. And thankfully, I had the habit of asking my domestic help, so we checked up. Otherwise, we would have used an expired product. So the point that we are trying to make is that the consumer should have the right to be informed. Then defective product or deficiency of service. One good thing that I like about the current Consumer Protection Act is that it, in deficiency of service, it talks about non-compliance with law as one of the parameter of deficiency of service. But inaccessibility into a product or service is currently not recognized as a deficiency of service. So, or defective product in that sense. So this is one of our recommendations, that inaccessibility of a good or a service should be recognized as one of the parameters. Next one is the right to seek redressal is also an important right of a consumer, right? And while what I know from my recollection, that currently Department of Consumer Affairs allows you to file online complaints only in certain cases, such as misleading advertisements or some other parameters. But for other complaints, you have to still file the complaint physically. There are certain specific requirements district forums have, where you may need to submit the set in triplicate, etc., and the copy needs to be served to the other party, etc. That entire process from a person with disability for a segment of a person with disability is inaccessible. So making sure that accessible grievance registration and entire process or the ecosystem to take the grievance to its logical conclusion is accessible is equally important. So I think not keeping it too long, but these are some brief recommendations that the report contains. Now I'll just, before Rahul moves to the next question, on whether the current law is insufficient on as far as RPWDA is concerned. Now you see and this is one of the challenges which Rahul would agree we are also facing in couple of cases before CCPD, is that when you go to CCPD and you say that as a person with disability you are facing this problem with this product or a service, many times you get technical arguments from the other side that this can't be done due to this reason, this can't be done due to that reason. Uh, an example possibly could be the digital KYC, where persons with disabilities, digital KYC cannot be done if they use thumb impression as a signature, because the the image of the biometrics cannot be verified using technology. It needs to be a biometric impression that the device needs to take. Now, that expertise, honestly speaking, from an adjudication perspective, a consumer forum would have better, and even the product service providers or the product manufacturers would be able to give that information better to a consumer dispute resolution redressal commission rather than a commissioner for persons with disabilities, because a commissioner for persons with disabilities may be very good with what a disability violation could be, but whether something works technically well from an industry perspective or not, or from a sectoral perspective, I think that is where the need to amend the Consumer Protection Act, and that is where the inadequacy of the law, or rather the RPWDA, to deal with such issues becomes very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Amar. So basically, I guess the main takeaways from Amar's address are: number one, the importance of universal design as a cross-cutting benefit for persons with and without disabilities, and reasonable accommodation as a top-up to them to that when universal design is insufficient. The the second is, the examples which he has given in terms of the need to be informed about things like expiry dates, which could be extremely sensitive and critical information that can have significant health impacts for persons with disabilities, and even things like clothes matching, etc., in the garments industry. And therefore the need to amend the provision on the right to information, right to be informed, to have provisions on to be accessibly informed. The fact that we can make use of the non-compliance with law hook at present and the deficiency of service, but the absence of inaccessibility as an expressly enumerated form of deficiency of service shuts out consumers with disabilities from using that mechanism. This point I didn't fully understand about technical arguments being made by CCPD, so we'll come back to this in the questions and answers and sort of see how consumer forums can be better forums to be able to deal with these kind of arguments. So I'll just park this to one side for the moment. So thanks very much, Amar, for extremely helpful insights. I'll now request Dr. Gupta to share her inputs, and in particular on the report more broadly, but in particular from two angles. Number one, how do we generate awareness amongst consumers with disabilities about their rights? And then two, how do we ensure that there aren't jurisdictional conflicts that arise between consumer commissions and disability commissions should the recommendations in the report come to pass? We often see these conflicts, for instance, arising between CCI and consumer fora, and in IPR and competition law, at that intersection such conflicts are rife, and there is a lot of jurisprudence on that which has developed over the years. So what is your input on this from a consumer rights perspective, consumer rights disability rights perspective? Thanks.
Thanks, Rahul, and thanks to the Vidhi Centre for inviting me here. I will give my comments on the two questions you have asked.
Yes.
Before that, I would like to refer to the recommendations, not section-wise recommendation, but the general recommendation.
Right.
The first recommendation is amendment in the Consumer Protection Act 2019. Second is survey of challenges faced by consumers with disabilities. I believe this should be the first recommendation.
Absolutely.
people must know what are the challenges the people with disability are facing. Then and then only we can sensitize the society, abled as well as disabled persons, that these are the challenges which our own brothers and sisters are facing. We have to be sensitive towards that. If we see someone who is trying to cross the road and there is too much of traffic on the road and our brother or sister is blind and cannot cross the road because of so much heavy traffic, then we should help our brother or sister. So sensitization will be there only when we know the challenges. Unless we know the challenge, actually every disability is not having the same challenge. Locomotively disabled persons have their own challenges. Blind persons have their own challenges. Deaf and dumb have their own challenges. Mentally disturbed persons have their own challenges. For every disability, challenges are different. So first of all, we have to find out, we have to make a list of what are the challenges the differently abled persons face in their life. Then only we can give the answer. Like my friend Amar has referred to matching of the color of the clothes. This is the challenge which is faced by a person who is visually disabled, but not for others. So we have to keep all these things in mind. So first recommendation should be that survey of challenges faced by consumers with disabilities. As far as consumers are concerned, you know, all of us are consumers. The moment we take birth, even before taking birth, we start consuming things. And we keep on consuming things even after our death. Our funeral has to be done. So we need wood, havan samagri and all that for funeral. So throughout our life and even after our life, we remain the consumer, whether able or disabled. And in my opinion, everyone is a disabled person. What you can do, I may not do. You have a good height, and my height is say 4 feet. Can you call me disabled? But I am disabled for doing number of things. I cannot take out the things from the Almirah. But you can. So disability or no disability, there is no definition, though in the Disability Act, Protection of Rights of Disability Act, whatever is the, sorry, I am misnaming the statute. As far as Disability Act is concerned, 21 disabilities are specified, but there are much more disabilities. With the age, person gets more disabled, even though, like me, if you look at me, I have no problem in my legs, I can walk, but I may be having pain. So I am feeling disability from inside. So disability has no definition. So first recommendation should be, there should be a survey of what challenges the person with special ability face, and these challenges are different from each other. Then we have to sensitize the society, not just the businesses. Unless we agree to help each other, we have this empathy towards each other, the government or the business houses can't help us. Sensitization has to be of the society. And how we can do that? It should start from the very beginning. We should start teaching all these things to our children the moment they start learning something. Like if our child go to play school, there may be a child who is differently able. So we should teach our child that don't bully that fellow. He or she is just like you. He or she may not do something, you may also not do all the things. Help that person. And this process process of sensitization must start from that level, and it should keep on going throughout the life. And if we especially look at the business houses, they run their business, whether it is manufacturing or distribution or selling, for money. We have to sensitize them, then don't run just after money. So many research and development is going on in the society. Look at the automobile sector. रोज एक नई कार आ रही है. Earlier, there used to be only petrol cars, then diesel cars come, CNG, LPG, EV, hybrid, fully automatic. Earlier, they used to be manual, fully automatic, semi-automatic. When we can do all that research, our business is capable of doing all that research, spending money for all that research. Why can't they do research for the special needs of differently abled persons? And again, we cannot say that कार के लिए सिर्फ जिनको पैर में प्रॉब्लम है उनके लिए कुछ कर ले. No. सबके लिए. There is, in our university, there is an officer in the examination branch. Both of his legs are suffered from polio. So he has to use Baisakis, but he can drive the car by making adaptations. You can say reasonable accommodation. He did it himself, of course, taking the help of mechanic. He did it himself in the normal car. He got it modified so that every function is on his fingers and thumb. By driving, he is not required to use the legs. And he is not required to use even his Baisakhi during driving. So reasonable accommodation is possible. If we talk about universal design, what do we mean by universal design? Can we make an item which will be fit for use for all of us? My opinion, no. Something which may be fit for blind person as well as which can be made fit for blind as well as non-blind person may not be fit for someone who is suffering from mental problems. So universal design, try to make as much as possible that everybody can use it, your product. And business houses, they should be forced to invest money for that. Like there is CSR, corporate social responsibility. There should be corporate disabled friendly responsibility. Invest money in research and you can produce 4 or 5 products of the same kind. One is fit for perfectly able person, other is fit for disabled person having one disability, third fit for second disability, and like that. That will result in inclusion and accessibility. We all need everything. All of us need food. All of us need clothes. All of us need mobile. All of us need paper and pen. All of us need computer. whether we have the knowledge of using the computer or not, all of us are having it. So everything is needed by everybody. So everything should be accessible to all in the shape, in the form, in modified form, which they can use that thing. If I am not having the fingers and I have to use this pen, I can't use it. So there should be some modified form of this, reasonable accommodation, that I, a person who is not having the thumb and the finger, can still, say by doing this or whatever may be, can use it. So there is a need of awareness and sensitization. Disabled person must be aware about their rights. What are the rights provided to them by the Rights of the Disabled Persons Act? And public should be sensitized about the needs of the disabled persons. For that, it should start from the very beginning, and we, after, as far as our colleges, universities, schools are concerned, we can have outreach programs, we can have conferences, we can send our students to different areas where there is more population of disabled persons to tell them these are your rights under this act. So that will help in sensitizing the society. Now, as far as the ambit of the two acts are concerned, in my view, 2016 Act is totally different, and the purpose of that Act is totally different from the 2019 Act. Consumer Protection Act was enacted for the purpose of protecting the rights of the consumers, all consumers, including abled and disabled persons. But Protection of Rights of Disabled Persons Act, it was enacted for the purpose of protecting the rights of the disabled persons only. In our constitution, we have Article 14, we have Article 15, we have Article 16. Article 14 says that provide right to equality. 15 and 16 says that there should be no discrimination on the basis of sex, caste, religion, not religion, tribe, etc., etc. But the word disability is not there. Under the Disability Act, there is a specific provision that they are equal. So we can say that disabled persons have two sets of fundamental rights. One provided under the Constitution of India and the other provided under the Disability Act. Right to equality, right to, there are various provisions. Right to life and personal liberty is also there. Right to medical treatment, right to health care, all these rights are there. So they got double protection, one under the Constitution and other under the Disability Act. And still, if we are not providing them these rights, it is our fault. The Disability Act is addressed to the government. It is addressed to the government. But Consumer Protection Act protects the right of the consumer from the wrongdoings of the business houses or service providers. That way, the ambit of the two statutes is totally different. Whatever provision is there in the Disability Act, it is addressed to the government. There is a provision for consumer goods. Section, which section is this? Let me see.
43.
Section 43. Consumer goods. See what it says. The appropriate government shall take measures. To whom the directive is? To the government. Not to the person who manufactured the good, not to the producer, not to the distributor, not to the service provider, not to the seller. It is a directive. even in the definition of consumer goods, the appropriate government shall take measures to promote development, production, and distribution of universally designed consumer products and accessories for general use for persons with disabilities. Government has the duty to promote manufacturing, production, distribution of goods which can be used by the disabled persons. Again, the directive is to the government, not to the individuals. So whatever provision is there, whatever directive is there, whatever right is there, the right is from the government, direction is to the government. But in the Consumer Protection Act, it is different. Directive is not to the government. The remedies available under the disability law is either you can approach the CCPD or you can go to the court. And there is a mandate that in every district there has to be a special court for disabled presided over by a session judge. District level court has to be there at every district. So special court, just like for deciding the sexual harassment cases, fast track court you can say, are there, provision for that is there and it has been complied with. It is not that direction is there, it has been complied with by the government, state governments, and in every district there is a special court for disabled persons. Plus the other remedies is you can approach the CCPD. Under the Consumer Protection Act, the relief available is, I have noted down some points on which I would like to comment from what she has said. There are three wings for redressal of grievance. The first is customer care. जो प्रोडक्ट आपने खरीदा है, जो सर्विस अवेल की है, वहां के कस्टमर केयर पर आप कंप्लेंट कीजिए. And you know now, under the Consumer Protection Act, even e-commerce is specifically included. Definition of e-commerce is there in the Act. Even prior to the specific inclusion, e-commerce were covered by Consumer Protection Act, but now to in the new Act, definition is there, it is included. So, and e-commerce rules are also enacted in 2020.
Yes.
And they provide that every e-commerce company, actually I am not a specialist in this e-commerce business and all that, so you may correct me, I am just giving an overview. There has to be a grievance officer, whether that is a multinational company or an Indian company. Even if it is multinational company, there has to be a dedicated grievance officer appointed for India. Complaint can be made online to that fellow, and he is bound to recognize the receiving of that complaint within 48 hours of sending the mail. And he is bound to solve the grievance, redress the grievance within 1 month. So that is there. Customer care service, grievance officer of the business house from which you avail the service or hire or buy the goods. Second is complaint to the CCPA, Central Consumer Protection Authority. And the cases of unfair practices, cases of misleading advertisements, and especially the class complaint, they can directly go to the CCPA, and CCPA is authorized to take suo motu action without any complaint. And on 15th of March this year, a specific portal has been created for CCPA on which you can file your complaint by mail. So you don't have to go, you don't have to send your complaint. You can just write on the portal and your complaint will be registered. And as per the information we are getting from the news as well as working of CCPA, we can say that CCPA is working quite well. Because CCPA is there from center till the district level. District magistrate is also a consumer protection authority. And secretary of the Consumer Affairs Ministry is the Central Consumer Protection Authority. So they are working well. And the third redressal forum is consumer commissions. There also now under the new act, there is a provision for filing of e-complaint. There is a provision for mediation. Because most of the consumer disputes can be solved by mediation. So it is mandatory that first of all the complaint which is filed in the Consumer Commission has to be first referred for mediation, and if the mediation fails, then only the commission will take up that case. So legislations are there. The main problem is the cases we have are so many, and that is because of our population. See the population of Delhi. छोटी सी एक यूनियन टेरिटरी है, कितना एरिया है दिल्ली के पास, and see the population. And consumerism has changed. It has crossed the limits. अब सब कुछ हम कंज्यूम करना चाहते हैं. It is because of that, जब consumerism इतना बढ़ेगा, population इतनी होगी, naturally disputes भी होंगे, तो उनको solve करने में time भी लगेगा. There is a mandate that court has to Consumer Commission, they have to decide the case within 90 days or at the most within 60 days, within 6 months. But no case is decided. शायद first hearing भी नहीं आती 3 महीने में, तो एक साल की डेट मिलती हैं. All that is there. Business houses should treat disabled persons as their target group, because we have around 5 crore of disabled persons in our country. 5 crore. More than 50% of the countries in the world is not having 5 crore population. And we are having 5 crore disabled persons. So if they spend money in research and development for developing goods for their benefit, they will not be at loss. They won't be at loss. They have so many people to use their products. As far as the Consumer Protection Act is concerned, I would like to say that you should suggest one more change to it. If you look at the definition of consumer, it says a person who purchase or hire goods or avail services for consideration. But for disabled persons, you can see that number of charitable institutions, they are engaged, they provide these things free of cost to the disabled persons, like artificial arms, legs, बहुत सारी चीजें, sometimes wheelchairs, number of things, I can't name them. So they provide these things free of cost to them. Since they get it free of cost, they are not consumer. If there is some defect in that good, they cannot go to the Consumer Commission. They have to go to, if they are disabled, they have to go to the special court. If they are not disabled, the general consumer, they have to go to the general codes. So this change is required to be specially for disabled persons. Actually, this requirement that who hires or avails of some services for consideration, for consideration should not be there, even if it is gratuitous. Like if, say, I am a disabled person and you are the owner of a taxi, and seeing me that a disabled lady is standing here, let's give her lift. You drop me at my destination and not charge me anything. If you drive negligently and I suffer injury, I cannot claim compensation from you I cannot approach the consumer forum. I have to go to the general courts, normal courts. Has to pay the court fee, has to engage a lawyer, वकालतनामा साइन करना होगा, वकील ही फाइल करेगा मेरी एप्लीकेशन. In consumer forum I can just send an email, application through email, and that will be treated as my application petition. So that is there. So it is required to be amended. What was your second question?
No, ma'am, I think you've addressed it quite adequately. The questions were on awareness generation and jurisdictional conflict. So I think you...
No, there is no jurisdiction conflict between Disability Act and CPC. If we look at the Disability Act, last part of that act, there is a provision which says that this act is in addition to and not in derogation to any other law. So the rights given by the 2016 acts are in addition to any other right given under any other law.
Right.
So there is no conflict. If we can avail the remedy under that 2016 statutes, well and good. Otherwise, we are free to avail remedy under any other law, including Consumer Protection Act.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that really professorial overview of the two regimes, and your point on prioritizing a survey was extremely important and well taken. In terms of knowing challenges that persons with disabilities face and sort of recognizing the commonality of challenges that everyone faces in terms of the height example that you gave, a broader a need for a broader sensitization of across different cross sections of people in society. The need to call out the relentless profit maximization tendency of businesses. How there can be innovation to deal with these kinds of challenges. The fact that different disability groups have different challenges, and it's the suggestions on sort of awareness generation, and the constitutional provisions, etc. So these are just a few important themes, and I guess you've given us some food for thought in terms of this horizontality point, which I had not considered, as to how under the CPA you can actually go after manufacturers, etc. Whereas under the RPWD Act you directly cannot. So that gives you an additional avenue, and the fact that it says this RPWD Act that it is in addition to means that a consumer forum cannot come and say that, look, you have to go under the RPWD Act, why are you coming before me as the consumer forum? So that's also a useful argument which can be deployed. So now, in the interest of time, maybe I'll just quickly ask a couple of questions to the panelists, and then we'll have about 10 minutes or so for audience questions. So Amar, my question to you is with respect to the technical argument front that you've made. So you have practical experience of using the CCPD and special courts, and therefore are aware of where they are effective and where they are not. So if you can develop this point a little bit further as to what kinds of arguments work before these commissions and what kind of remedies they typically grant, so that then it will become clear as to why, if at all, consumer forums may be resorted to by PWDs for resolution of consumer grievances.
Sure, Rahul. Typically, if you look at the orders that state commissioners or chief commissioner for persons with disabilities pass, uh, they are more towards they are more dealt in a disability centric manner. You will have disability component to it, how disability gets impacted by a particular service or product being inaccessible, etc. But when you look at consumer forum or any such other industry forum, so to speak, where the entire industry is watching and entire industry is keeping a close watch on what's happening in a matter, you not only have the arguments around what has been done wrong to the consumer, etc., but what are technical, the other side always will come with technical reasons of why a particular thing cannot be done or can be done, etc. So if a ride cannot be offered to a disabled person, the amusement park will come with an argument that why it is unsafe, etc., and why it is technically not feasible for me to make sure that person with disability is able to enjoy this ride adequately with others. These kind of arguments, because CCPD or SCPDs are technically quite distant from the industry as such, and from the sector. So consumer goods and services in itself is a sector, and which is why somewhere in the report we have also said that the notification of sectoral standards is very important. So from that perspective, that technical know-how that is possible to be presented before the consumer forums and for them to be able to adjudicate upon, I think that expertise, like we see in the accessibility cases, like how respondents try to misguide CCPD saying that we have already addressed some of these accessibility concerns and the app is accessible, and then we call upon subject matter experts to do an audit and say whether something is accessible or not, and for us to be able to understand that technical nuances of technology to CCPD, etc., becomes quite difficult. Whereas if you would have somebody from IT background to hear such complaints, it is more easier to explain them. Similarly, from consumer forum perspective, they are better placed to assess these nitty-gritties of industry specific challenges, and hence I think that they are better placed to solve consumer specific grievances of persons with disabilities.
Thanks, Amar. So now what I propose to do is to open this up to audience Q&A, and the one or two remaining questions I have, I'll meld them into the audience questions, because I don't want a situation where we are left with no time for audience questions. So I just request anyone who has any questions to raise their hand, and one of my team members can hopefully tell me as to who has raised their hands, and then we can ask them. Call on them to ask their question. So any questions?
जितना मैंने पढ़ा है कंज्यूमर कोड के अंदर जब हम
just kindly just introduce yourself in a minute, in a second, and then go to the question.
माय नेम इज आशुतोष सिंघल. मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि कंज्यूमर कोर्ट में जितना मैंने पढ़ा है, जब हम 400 रुपीज़ या उससे ज़्यादा का परचेज करते हैं तभी हम कंज्यूमर बनते हैं, हम तभी कोर्ट केस कर सकते हैं. लेट सपोज एक डिसेबल यूज़र ने कोई परचेज किया, वो मिडेबल टाइम में जो 45 डेज की विंडो होती है उसमें कंपनी कह रही है कि नहीं हम आपको वापस कर देते हैं आपने जो प्रोडक्ट खरीदा है, और ऊपर से हम वो भी दे देते हैं, कंपलसेशन भी दे देते हैं. तो लाइक इट इज नॉट नाउ ही इज नॉट कंज्यूमर. तो व्हाट विल हैपन इन दैट केस?
Right. So there are two parts to this question. One, the consideration requirement. एक quantum का तो नहीं होता है, strictly speaking, so that we needn't even take to the panelists, because there is no quantum requirement under the Act. But a consideration requirement definitely exists. So how do we ensure that that doesn't come in the way of a PWD being able to raise a grievance? Because sometimes it also happens that platforms themselves are inaccessible, so that for example, when Swiggy became very inaccessible, I could not, as a blind person, go and place an order there. So where does the question of consideration even arise? So that's one part to the question. And I'll put this to Dr. Gupta because she is an expert on consumer law. And then the second part is, what do we do about this, right? So this has happened to me in a case where someone you wanted to use this Khan Global Academy app, right, which was inaccessible. It is a consumer service because services are defined very broadly under the CPA. Now they said, sorry, we can't make it accessible. You take your money back and go home. Now, in that kind of a situation, how do we make sure that we are able to get it addressed and not let them off the hook just by returning the consideration?
Actually, I think in our country, we can't take further action. Our country is like that, especially for the web link not working. Number of times, take the example of income tax. During the last days or even before that, the website is always not working.
Right.
Or it opens just for 10-12 minutes. You file your return during that time, whatever is left is left. You keep on waiting. Let me give you the example. I have to make an application for some post, and that application has to be sent to the Supreme Court judge. And a link is given. Link is given that application can be emailed to this address. Since yesterday, I am sending it, but it is not reaching. Then I inquired, what is the problem? ये bounce back क्यों हो रही है बार बार? मुझे तो application देनी है, date निकल जाएगी. Then I come to know कि yes, it is not working. If it will not work till today evening, they will create a new link.
Right.
So these kinds of problem in our country, we don't treat them as problems. We have to keep the status of our country in mind.
Right.
Number of times flights are cancelled. They refund the money. Sometimes the reason is bad weather, that the flight cannot take off. It is late due to this reason, that reason, so many times. Sometimes if you go to the consumer courts, they do grant compensation.
Right.
Even for delay in flight, or losing some goods in flight, or suffering some injury in flight or at the airport, they do take into consideration, but generally,
Right.
no relief for such, you can say, inconvenience are available. There is no minimum amount. Even if you suffer a loss of 1 rupee, you can approach the consumer forum, consumer commissions.
Right. Amar, did you want to say anything on this, or can we move to the next question?
I'll just quickly add that it is upon the consumer to decide whether he or she wants to accept the refund or not. And if you don't accept the refund, you have very much the right to pursue the claim.
Whether you are satisfied with the relief offered by the person from whom you have the complaint or not, it is you who have to decide.
Absolutely. That's it.
Right. Any other questions? Yes, please. Yes. Dr. MP Yadav, I believe.
Whereby we have to probe beneath the surface of the text of RPWD Act 2016. Because the whole conflict, I think, is between want and can't. As Advocate Amar Jain said, when we go to CCPD, the respondents say, we can't fix up this issue for this reason or that reason. And RPWD Act 2016 casts a duty and responsibility upon the government establishments to campaign, to create sensitization and awareness. People say RPWD Act doesn't have provisions for the protection of the consumers with disabilities. No, but it has, as Professor Gupta said, I should have introduced myself. I am Dr. M.P. Yadav from Delhi University. So, okay, Section 47 casts a mandatory duty upon Rehabilitation Council of India to impart trainings to the lawyers, judges, police officers, Panchayati Raj members, legislators, administrators. So, judges, chairperson of the consumer goods, redressal forums, and the district special courts for persons with disabilities, where ASJ2 is designated as a special court, but those courts are not functional. So don't you think, please, that this organization which is sitting silently, Rehabilitation Council of India, should come to the fore, and we, because here there are lawyers with disabilities, and better to say, more than the lawyers with disabilities, there are thinkers with disabilities, whether they are professors, students of law or literature or any other discipline. They are thinkers of disabilities. So don't you think we should build a pressure upon the Rehabilitation Council of India to do their mandatory duty of imparting training to the judges, lawyers, police, Panchayati Raj members, administrators, and the legislators? Thank you.
Who wants to take this?
Rahul, maybe I can say that Dr. Yadav's point is valid. Awareness is really the key. And just on the point of can't and want, I'll just say that look, business ultimately looks at the business imperative to do something. And there is clear evidence. I'll just cite two examples very quickly. I'm conscious of the time. Namayatri in Bangalore, which is a ride-hailing, auto ride-hailing app. They basically made their training modules and they introduced something called as purple rides for persons with disabilities. And in 6 months to 1 year time frame, they've been able to earn revenues in lakhs. I don't want to quote the numbers because I don't know whether they are in public domain or not. Future Retail, when it worked on accessibility of malls and Big Bazaar specifically, they realized very soon when they started doing, when they started providing disability assistance, when they started organizing preview shopper sale for persons with disabilities, they saw people with autism, people with speech and hearing impairment, people with visual impairment participating as massive shoppers, not just shopping of 1,000-2,000 rupees, massive shopping of each individual shopping more than 10,000, 15,000 just in a single day. So there is clear business imperative that consumers with disabilities can equally become asset, and return on investment can be very good. It is definitely an issue of awareness and sensitization, which not just RCI but even all bodies within their respective domains need to take up.
One last question we can take.
Question.
Yes, could you introduce yourself?
I am a MB Chandra working for media.
Right.
The thing is, you come out with frameworks, guidelines, that keeps coming. But what is when the addressal mechanism is will not speed up? What is the use of coming with frameworks, guidelines? Addressal mechanism, the cases are pending for so long. So how to speed up the addressal mechanism?
Right. So on this, Dr. Gupta, I also had a question, which is practically speaking, in terms of how, because I don't have experience of having appeared before a consumer forum. You often address district forum judges, so you are aware of this and you're an expert on the subject. So typically, what is the life cycle of a complaint? How long does it take from institution to resolution? What are the kinds of remedies that they grant? So if you could speak a little bit to how the CDRCs in particular function. And then one last point which maybe Amar and you can close with is some low-hanging fruits that we can work towards in the coming period. Of course, the legislative amendments that the report proposes is one thing, but on the engagement, like in terms of working with government or taking up litigation opportunities, what are some low-hanging fruits that you think can be worked on in the next 1 or 2 years?
As far as redressal is concerned, getting relief from consumer commissions is not so easy.
Right.
From the district commission, it will take around 4 years.
Right.
If appeal is filed in the state commission, 3-4 more years.
Right.
And if then appeal is filed in the national commission, again 3-4 years.
Right.
And from the national commission, appeal can go to the Supreme Court. So it is as time consuming as normal courts. The only thing is, the act does not require appearance of advocates. But I have not seen anybody appearing without an advocate.
Practically.
Because business houses, one side there is a consumer and other side there is a manufacturer or service provider. So they always hire advocates and you personally cannot present your case.
Right.
They have all the knowledge of legal advocacy. So you also have to hire a case,
Right.
an advocate.
Right.
That is the problem. Only thing is that you don't have to pay the court fee. In the normal general court, you have to pay the court fee. In consumer commission, you don't have to pay the court fee. It is very small. Very small.
Right.
But for the advocates, we have to pay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Unless you seek legal aid from the district legal aid authorities.
Right. And any low-hanging fruits from your perspective?
I don't want to comment on that.
Right. Amar, any low-hanging fruits from your perspective?
Rahul, just before getting there, very quickly, I wanted to address the question that why, what is the point of a framework when the redressal is so much delayed? If you don't have the framework in place,
There can't be redressal.
there can't be redressal and you will never be entitled to a redressal.
Yeah.
Right.
A person with disabilities rights would have not been recognized had this law been not there. Similarly, consumer rights would have never been recognized had the framework in place wouldn't have been there. There are definitely...
Let me
Sure.
intervene. This act has helped a lot for disabled persons. Earlier, no government or private building, especially educational institutions, they were disabled friendly.
Right.
They were not having disabled friendly toilets. Now every building is disabled friendly.
Right.
That is because of this act.
Yeah.
Had this act not been there, disabled person will not be able to get the education. The reservation has been increased from 3% to 5% in educational institutions.
Right.
In jobs also it is at least 4%. It can't be less than 4%. So, of course, the enactment of act always help. It gives us right. It is we are unfortunate that we are not able to exercise those rights as speedily as we should have. That is the problem. But the right is given to us by the legislature.
Yeah. Amar,
Yeah.
on low-hanging.
On the low-hanging fruits, I think two things that come to my mind immediately. One is working with CDRC, DCA, etc., to start sensitization and training campaigns for consumer forums across the nation. And including, very rightly pointed out, I think by ma'am, Jago Grahak Jago type of campaigns should have disability inclusive component. That's a very good way to sensitize even people at large. The second thing that I would really like to try is to explore the angle of non-compliance with law under the definition of deficiency of service. that's an interesting one. I think we should give it a try and see what happens when we kind of take up a grievance against a particular service provider or a product manufacturing company to say that they're non-compliant with the law as far as the accessibility standards compliance is concerned. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry for the intervention. मैं एक बात यहाँ add करूँगा कि although that the Act gives us rights, I'm making an addition to what the panelists have said. The Act has given us the rights, but we are fighting for those rights. But there where we have rights, others have duties. Those duties cast upon the respondents, the responsible persons, institutions are not being performed, and that's why under the compulsion we are constrained to go and knock at the doors of the courts. That is unfortunate aspect of it. So there where we have rights, they have duties, and they have duty to protect our rights, which they are not doing, and they must.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Yadav. Thanks everyone for being here again and for your extremely sort of provocative and insightful questions. I think this marks the start of an important conversation on how we mainstream disability rights in laws beyond just the RPWD Act, and ensure that. So now there is Section 23 in the Broadcasting Services Bill, which has recently been floated, which has provisions on accessible media. So this is something which is gaining currency, the integration of disability rights issues in quote-unquote mainstream laws. So with that, I think we would like to bring this to a close. Does someone want to give the vote of thanks, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So Soumya will be delivering the vote of thanks, and with that we will close.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Panelists have brought out the importance of data collection, sensitization and awareness generation for better protection of consumers with disabilities. In addition to that, at a primary level, we seem to agree that the CPA is the forum which has more scope for change, as evident from the arguments of the panelists. I would like to thank all the panelists again for taking the time to participate in the discussion. Your presence and participation have made today truly special. Thank you. We would like to extend a token of appreciation to the panelists. Arushi will do it.
Right.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, for providing your expertise in the consumer rights, which was evident in the discussion. And thank you so much, Amar, for bringing your expertise on disability law to the discussion. And again, thank you to Rahul for very nicely moderating the discussion. None of this would have been possible without the dedication and collaboration of all those involved in this endeavor. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our team members, researchers, legal experts, and all the stakeholders who have contributed their time, expertise, and passion to this report. I would like to specially congratulate my co-author, Rahul Bajaj and Hussain Anas Khan, for tirelessly research and compile this comprehensive report. In closing, I invite each of you to join us in the mission to ensure that the rights and needs of persons with disabilities are fully recognized and respected in India's consumer market. Together, let us strive towards a future where every individual, regardless of ability, can exercise their consumer rights with dignity and equality. Once again, thank you for your unwavering support and commitment towards inclusion and access for persons with disabilities, and for taking the time to participate in this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.